Hi there, this is Craig Wilson, and just like to take another look at an image out of the photo album of Edward Pratt. This one is titled Interior of Barracks, and in fact, that's exactly what we see here. We see the inside of the soldiers' barracks. Specifically, we're looking at the squad room of Company K of the 23rd Regiment of Infantry, so Pratt was assigned to Company K, and this space is where most of the enlisted men would have lived together. If you visited Fort Mackinac today, this space is actually where the sutler's store is. So this is where our museum store is at the fort today. Now this image is pretty unique because it is one of only 3 interior views that we know of at Fort Mackinac over the fort's entire 115 years of military service. So there's this one. There is actually another interior view of Pratt's quarters that appears elsewhere in the album, and there's one other image of the interior of an officer's quarters, again from the 1880s. But those 3 pictures are the only 3 that we know of that show what the buildings would have looked like inside at any time during the fort's active military service. So this image, like many of the other Fort Mackinac images in the Pratt album, is pretty candid. We see the enlisted men just relaxing in their living quarters in this view. You've got a couple men playing cards there in the foreground, and a variety of other soldiers relaxing in the background. Now, some of the men have taken off parts of their uniform. Some of them are wearing non-regulation hats, but we can see that there are at least 3 non-commissioned officers sitting in the background. It looks like 2 corporals and perhaps a sergeant. The man kind of front and center playing cards is a musician. We can tell that again by the 2 stripes running down the outseam of his trousers. So in addition to the soldiers themselves, we get a really good view of standard furnishings in an enlisted soldier's barracks from the 1880s. Now, all of that equipment would have been provided by the quartermaster department. And in fact, if you look at the table that the men are playing cards on, you can actually see a QMD stencil right there on the end for quartermaster department. Beyond that table, the chairs that the men are sitting in also appear to be a quartermaster department standard, so you may have found chairs like this at posts across the country. And then as you look at the individual bunks for the soldiers, you can see that each one has a foot locker at the foot, so that's where the soldier could store some personal items. You note that they all do appear to have padlocks on them. And then the beds themselves are an iron bunk that was kind of a new design in the mid-1880s. These actually had a woven wire mattress. And speaking of the sleeping accommodations for the soldiers at Fort Mackinac, in 1885, Dr. John Bailey, who was the acting assistant post surgeon, actually said that the enlisted men have been supplied with 1 mattress each stuffed with cotton. 1 cotton pillow each, 2 cotton pillowcases, and 4 sheets to each bed. Such accommodations are very much better than those furnished by ordinary hotels and may be said to be truly luxurious. So again, we get a good look at those beds. We can see especially the bed frames there at the end. We can also see the mattresses and some of the bed coverings that Bailey was talking about. Looking at a few other elements in this room, along the back wall, there appear to be some, again, standard issue Army lamps to provide illumination. On the back wall, you can see perhaps a bulletin board. There's some papers tacked up there, maybe for orders or notices for the men. And then in front of that bulletin board, there is a rifle rack. So there's a place in here for the soldiers to store their weapons. And if you look very, very closely at those rifles, a few of them appear to have training bayonets affixed to them. You might be able to see that there's a large ball at the top of those training bayonets. The bayonets were not made out of metal. Instead, they were made out of whalebone, and they actually had a big rubber ball on the end. And so when the men would go to drill for bayonet practice, they could actually fence with one another. They actually wore something very similar to a fencing mask, and they could actually drill with those bayonets without hurting one another. So that's just a quick look at this interior view of the enlisted barracks at Fort Mackinac in the 1880s. Again, a very unique image because we don't have many interior views of the fort. This image, all the rest of the images from Pratt's time at Fort Mackinac, as well as images from the rest of his Army career, have been just republished as part of a new book that Mackinac State Historic Parks is putting out called Through an Officer's Eyes, the photo album of Edward B. Pratt, U.S. Army, 1873 to 1902. If you'd like to pick up a copy of that, it'll be available at our museum stores and visitor centers a little bit later this summer. And we do hope that you'll be able to make it up to Mackinac Island to come join us at Fort Mackinac and see some of the places that Pratt was photographing back in the 1880s.